Most horror sequels play it safe, but Final Destination 2 decided to traumatize an entire generation. If you ever switched lanes when you saw a logging truck, this movie is the reason. Final Destination 2, we will be deep diving into it. Let's get into it. So welcome to another Fright Brothers review of Final Destination 2. If you are a fan of horror movies and you like to have a fresh perspective that you don't typically get with a lot of channels, this channel is it. Ryan, let's start off with the premonition here for Final Destination 2. Can you explain the premonition and what happens?
So with this Final Destination, this is one of the better premonition sequences in the franchise. So this is the one with the log trucks. I'm sure you all are aware of that. So we have Kim going on a spring break adventure with her friends, and she's getting ready to get on this highway. And right as she's getting on the highway, she starts to see a few subtle little signs or omens that something sinister may be coming or approaching. And that's when we see her, the homeless woman comes up to the car with the cans, and then silly friends start laughing and all. And then right when they get on the interstate and start driving, that's when she starts to see people. For one, she sees a little boy in the car in that passenger seat with the two trucks, and he's hitting the vehicles together. And then her radio is playing Highway to Hell. So she's starting to notice these little things happening, and this is all within her premonition. And so it's slowly starting to build up until we get the pile-up sequence with the log truck, one of the chains snapping, and then the log falling off the log truck and bouncing, one of them hitting the cop's car and going straight through the car. And then from there, we see the other victims of death's wrath at that, or during that premonition.
So yes, with this scene, you have Kim, who is our main protagonist of this entire film. She is going on, I guess, a trip to Florida there with one of her female friends and then a couple of guys as well. And so it looks like everything's going to work out. She has this premonition. I think it's important to note that it takes place a year after the first Final Destination and the whole premonition of Flight 180. Another thing important to note is that with this premonition, it's a chain reaction. In fact, in many ways, it's more realistic than a premonition there where you're on a plane, because there's a lot more accidents because more people travel using vehicles than they do traveling by plane. And then also you notice the chain reaction in the sequence here with the motorcycle there, with who we find out is Eugene. He's riding the motorcycle. You have Evan, who's in the old Trans Am sports car or muscle car. You have a cyclist. You have a mother there, Nora, and I believe her son Tim. And you have all these people, and then you see it unfold, all this chain reaction unfold, and all of the people die. And then it's almost like she has a dream. She wakes up, she actually is driving, she steps out of the car, Kim, and then the police officer goes to her. And then what really happens is a lot of people get killed. There's still a major pile-up accident there. And as the vehicle is about to get rammed by this big giant truck, the police officer there pulls her out of the way and saves her from being taken out, and her friends die. That was one thing that caught me off guard, that surprised me about it. Ryan, what did you think about that? How this was different, that all the friends die, whereas in the first one, we have Alex save a bunch of his friends and his colleagues, fellow students. What did you think about that when you saw that first time?
So pretty much we see that death is working differently, which I like that the writers, they kind of change things up on us in this film. And if you notice, we don't get as much. Remember on the first film that people were very irritated with Alex for warning them of what was going to come. Whereas in this film, it's not, you don't have the main character, Kim, is not getting as much backlash. So I really like that. And then the whole sequence, this is probably the best premonition sequence in the whole franchise, because I've seen all of these films multiple times. And it's something about those log trucks that I can talk to anybody outside of here and they'll tell me, your Final Destination, log trucks. Everybody remembers this premonition sequence. So if that's the case, it's definitely got to be the best.
And what makes this realistic is, like I said earlier, more people drive, more people are out on the highway. There are large accidents that occur on the highway, and this is reasonable. This is something that could happen. It's not something that you would have to see a boogeyman or a Jason or a Freddy. This is realistic and can happen and does happen on a regular basis here. And I think the practical effects that they used in the scene is you see the log slam into the police officer's vehicle and basically decapitating him and going through the whole entire roof and middle portion of the vehicle. And then you see the motorcycle, Eugene getting taken out with the motorcycle falling off, and the motorcycle comes back and slices him up. And you see all these vehicles just getting rammed and all this stuff. Very realistic. So I thought that part was a good part. The one part I didn't think was great was the nudity. I didn't think that was appropriate. Didn't need to be in part of the film. It takes away from the enjoyment, and really that's my biggest issue with this Premonition opening scene. So let's go ahead and move on to our actual kill scenes. So starting off with the first kill scene after the Premonition, we'll discuss Evan Lewis and the apartment fire escape. So with that stated, we see Evan go into his apartment. He's buying all these gifts and stuff like that, and he has one huge gift. It's an iMac computer. Back in the day, it's amazing how dated this movie is, because the iMac back then looked so much different than it does now. But he buys all this stuff. We found out is because he recently won the lottery. He was the guy driving the Trans Am vehicle, muscle vehicle there during the accident, and he doesn't get taken out because he's stalled out there because of Kimberly blocking him from being able to get on the road. But with him, he has some issues and stuff like that going on, where he's trying to fix some food and then eventually goes through some stuff. So Ryan, did you want to discuss the specifics of this kill scene here?
Oh, he's going into his nasty apartment with stuff all over the floor. So one of the first things he does when he gets in that apartment, and you have to pay attention to these scenes, because he takes that spaghetti and he tosses it out the window. And we learned that that is a fatal mistake of all of the mistakes that he's making while he's in the apartment. Another mistake, which isn't a fatal one, is, well, somewhat fatal. Him put the magnet, remember, it fell into his Chinese food, and then he throws it in the microwave. And then the microwave is sparking up with the magnet in there. And then he's putting the watch on and I think he had a ring or some piece of jewelry that fell in the sink, and then he tries to reach down in the garbage disposal. And see, this is where the film directors do a good job, because they play with our minds, because we're thinking he's going to maybe there's going to be an explosion with that microwave, or maybe the garbage disposal is going to shred his hand up in the garbage disposal. So like all these different things, and then that's when that fire breaks out. I believe it's because he's cooking some stuff on the stove too.
Yeah, he's cooking like fish sticks on the stove. He spills oil all over the gas stove, and so it creates a bit of a fire. And then, of course, the magnet in the microwave and the food, explosive there. And then, so fire comes out. It seems like he's gonna get burned, right? But then he's able to get his hand out of the garbage disposal. He starts using the fire extinguisher to spray the fire, but realizes the fire's gonna overtake it. So he goes out the fire chute and makes it outside of his apartment, and then he nearly falls down, but he doesn't, and is able to stand on his feet. He slips on the spaghetti that he had thrown out the window just a few moments earlier, and then falls down, and then the escape ladder is falling, and then it stops, and we think this is the end of the scene. So it's a pause, and then we see it actually continue and nick him in the eye. So another thing to point out about this scene is that the use of I think there was the spelling of I with the letters there on the refrigerator. iMac was used as the computer that he purchased. And so we see that being used to cause not a prediction, but omen to let you know that something with his eye is going to be taken out. So that was that scene. Ryan, what are your thoughts about this scene?
So it was a very creative scene, and these are the scenes, the reason why I like these movies and I enjoy The Final Destination, because there's so many different things happening all at one time. And your job is to figure out what is going to cause this person to die, because but it's like, what's going to cause it? And so I think this scene does a good job of playing on those expectations. So.
Now, for myself, I'm not that big of a Final Destination person. I like to see a personality through the villain character, and here the villain is death, which is an entity that we don't see. And as we know, with Father Time, all of us will die. So that's a given. But overall, the scene was creative. So let's move on to the dentist scene, where Tim and his mother Nora go to the actual dentist, and he gets worked on, or is supposed to have some type of dental work done. And what happens there is that he's sitting in the dentist chair. and it looks like the dentist is working on him. And then a couple of pigeons keep flying into the window and distracting him as he's trying to give him some numbing medication there to do some work to his teeth. But he gets distracted as I guess a bird gets into the dentist's office. So he stops what he's doing, but Tim's mouth is still wide open and he can't close it. And one of these little fishes that he has on the ceiling, a little plastic fish, falls down into his mouth, and he almost suffocates because he can't move his mouth and he can't move his arms or anything to save himself. But the assistant comes in, takes it out of his mouth, and then moves on. And we think all is good because he and his mom are leaving the dentist, and everything is good. And then we see Kim come over and she says, the pigeons, wait, you going to die. I remember the pigeons and stuff like that. And the guy's like, oh, there's pigeons. And so a bunch of pigeons, they start flying up. They distract the guy that's holding this glass on some type of machine, a crane. And then the glass drops from high up and just squashes Tim up into many pieces there. Ryan, what were your thoughts about that scene?
So Kim comes up and she yells pigeons, and then he sees pigeons in front of him and he runs over to try to scare them because they're on the ground. And then by him doing that caused the pigeons to fly into the crane operator's face, and he inadvertently hits one of the joystick that causes it to release the glass while he's right underneath where that glass pane is, and that's when he gets mashed.
Now, what are your thoughts there?
So with me, that definitely is one of my favorite kills in the franchise. We have the filmmakers are basically faking us out with thinking that Tim is going to die in the dentist's office. And there were so many different ways he could have died in there, because he had the nitric oxide being used in the dentist's office, and then he could have suffocated on that toy that fell in his mouth. But then he walks out, we think, free and fine and dandy, and then this happens. And this is where I come in and I say, sometimes, and just like I said in our last video, I believe that the premonitions actually are causing these deaths to happen in more of a, basically death is like toying with its victims whenever we have these premonitions. Because the main character, Kim, she's warning him, and you would think that she's helping, but it's almost like it's making it worse, because he told him pigeons and he went over the pigeons. So it's like premonitions are contributing to the deaths, in my opinion. So
overall, I thought this was a creative death scene. I think the death scene setups are really good. The issue that I have is that there's a lack of character development. It seems like the focus is way too much on the actual kills, not enough on who is Tim, who is Nora, who are these people that are dying. All they are seeming to be characters that are serving the purpose of creating a kill scene. Two-dimensional characters, and they don't have any kind of dynamic character development in this type of movie here. But let's go ahead and move on to the next one, and that's the elevator decapitation. So our crew now, after Tim's death, has gathered together police officer's apartment. I believe his name is Thomas or Thompson or something. So they gather at his place, and they're all trying to figure out what is happening, why it's happening, what's going on. And different than the first film, people are dying in the reverse order instead of in order in which they would typically die. Or have died if the premonition was fulfilled. And so the next in that reverse order is Nora. Nora is supposed to be the next to die. And so Nora enters an elevator. She walks out of the apartment. She enters an elevator. Eugene is in the elevator with her. And then there's this old man in there with prosthetics. These prosthetics have hooks on them. And so what happens is that Kim gives Nora a call on her cell phone and tells her, hey, I have a premonition that's unfolding that you're going to die by a man that's going to hook you or use hooks to kill you. So what happens is her cell phone falls to the ground. She has a ponytail. Her hair gets caught into the prosthetics. As she's trying to get out of the elevator to avoid death, she gets caught in those prosthetics and can't move her body out of the elevator. And the elevator doors close on her, and her head is outside of the elevator and the rest of her body is inside of the elevator. Now, if we all know this, elevators, usually when you put their motion sensor, so if you put your hand near the door, it opens back up. That's as a safety mechanism, but this one doesn't have that. And so she ends up getting her head decapitated as the elevator closes and continues to move. And it decapitates her. Head's inside the elevator. Eugene screaming, and the two women that were on the outside trying to pull her back in, they're upset as well because her head got decapitated. Ryan, what did you enjoy about this particular scene?
Well, this one I actually didn't like too much, and the main reason why is because the premonition sequences are supposed to be for the main character in the Final Destination franchise. And in this whole sequence, Rory actually helps assist Kim in discovering this premonition because he falls, I think he goes over to some closet and falls down, and then he sees some shadows that make it look like there's a man with hooks. And so he talks to her, and then that's when light bulb goes off in Kim's head, and then she warns Nora. But I didn't like how Rory is discovering these premonitions. It should only be the main character. That's how Final Destination works. They're very templated films, and the secondary characters are not supposed to have premonitions. But then again, it's a different movie than the first one. But most times it's usually the main character. So I didn't like that. And then I also didn't like the elevator causing the death like that, because we all know elevators, like you said before, they have sensors on them and they don't behave like that. It kind of reminds me of the garage door kill from Scream. Yeah, garage doors don't do that. So elevators don't do this. So
exactly, it seemed a little bit unrealistic in this situation that you have an elevator decapitate someone's head there. Another thing is the lack of development of characters. I just don't like how this is all unfolding. It seems to me that the film is focusing more on the kills than the actual development of character and showing a good story. So let's move on to the next one, and that's Kat's demise, farm fence airbag issue. So Kat, and then I think the other guy, was it Rory and Rory? So we'll talk about Kat first. So everybody is getting into a vehicle so that they can go to the hospital because they have a encounter with the mortician, Williams Bloodworth, played by Tony Todd. And in this one, Todd gives a different rule than he gave in the previous film. He says that you can defeat death, and not by trying to save someone, but actually by someone being born. And so if someone is born, it could actually cause death to be thwarted. And so they're going to the hospital because there was a pregnant lady that was in the premonition that Kim had at the beginning of the film. And they're thinking that, oh, well, she gives birth to a baby that will end this whole death sequence that we're having done to us through death here. So if she gives birth, this will stop us from dying. So they're on their way to the hospital, and Kat is driving the vehicle. Kat is this middle-aged woman who smokes cigarettes. She definitely focuses on how she appears to look towards others, which is something that we all should do to a certain degree. She seems to be very focused on that, almost in a vain type of way. She's driving the vehicle. What happens is that pipe, she gets into a wreck, PVC pipe crashes through the vehicle. It basically punctures her, I believe, and then it also punctures Eugene. Eugene has some issues with his lungs due to this car wreck. And so as they're trying to use the jaws of life because she's impaled and stuck in the seat, firefighters end up causing her to die. Ryan, did you want to talk about that and give your thoughts?
Yeah, so that PVC pipe had come through the back window of that Expedition. I want to say it was a Ford Expedition, 2001 or 2000 model. And it went through, and it was it broke right behind her seat, right behind her head. And so she's talking to the firefighter when he's trying to get her out of the vehicle. And then she's like, can you keep it down? I think she was on the phone or trying to do something on the cell phone or something. And then he's like, sure, I'll put it in quiet mode. And then I forget what piece of equipment he had, but he hit the door with it, and it activates the airbag in her seat and the steering wheel, and then it comes out and hits her in the head, and then her head gets impaled by the PVC pipe. And so that's how we get her death scene, which I didn't care for either too much. I didn't think it built up enough. It was just too quick for me. So
I think the thing that makes these kills have a lack of oomph to them is the fact that there's no character development. So we don't the fact that these characters are dying don't really have a whole lot of emotional meaning to them or impact there. So let's go ahead and move to the next one, and that's Rory Peters' death. And so Rory gets the barbed wire explosion death. So at around the same area, there's this farm boy. He almost gets hurt and killed. Rory saves him, and then Rory starts talking to Kim and says, hey, basically saying his last words here, that he wants to be remembered since he's the next one to die, and giving his final words to Kim. And he was like, hey, death is coming. I know it's coming. Hopefully I'll be remembered, not for some of these other things that I've done and being a pothead and all this kind of other stuff. And then it cuts to a couple of scenes later. We see him standing in the middle of the field. And then we see the officer there fall down because he intentionally falls down to the ground to avoid getting hit by the explosion. But Rory doesn't Rory just keeps standing up, and this barbed wire fence flies and bisects him in multiple spots and cuts through him like a laser. Ryan, what were your thoughts about this scene?
So this one was a little bit of a better kill sequence because the explosion was caused by the cigarette that Kat was smoking. And after she had died, that cigarette fell and it went on the ground. And I believe there was a gas leak from the news van that had arrived on scene because they backed into a rock, which punctured the gas tank and caused the gas to leak out. And so that gas leaked out. It got to around where Kat's, the front seat of her, it got to around the front of her vehicle. And when she died, the cigarette fell out of her hand and it ignited that area, caused that explosion. And that explosion, the force of it caused that fence to fly.
Exactly.
And the CGI was not, at the time it was good, but looking at this present day, it doesn't look too good. I mean, you can tell it's a little bit too clean. There's too much of it just doesn't look right. You can tell that it looks fake. So that took me out a little bit, but overall it was a good kill sequence.
Again, don't want to be a dead horse here, but the kill scenes are creative. They just lack character development and us having emotional attachment to these particular characters. And this one, they shoehorned it in right before the actual kill, which was kind of sloppy writing to me. But let's go ahead and move on to the next one here. So the hospital explosion. So our group finally makes it to the hospital there to witness the death, or not the death, but the birth of Isabella's child. And they're worried because Kim has a premonition that their doctor is going to try to kill Isabella there while she's giving birth to the child. She, of course, doesn't want that to happen, especially if the child birth can save them from dying. So they rush to the hospital, and then they get there and they ultimately thwart the doctor from harming Isabella. And then we see Claire running over there to look after Eugene, who was seriously hurt and went to the hospital because of the crash from the previous scenes earlier with Kat getting into a car crash. And so he's in the hospital, his lungs have been punctured, and he's on basically oxygen. And she goes into his room to just see how things are doing. And then by her going to opening the door, it causes basically a bunch of things to unfold, which leads to an explosion. And so Claire ends up dying there. We see her burnt but dead body. And then we also assume that Eugene has died because his room just exploded and he was in there. And then of course Kim is there and the police officer is there. They do witness the birth of the baby, but they're sad because Claire has died. Eugene appears to have died there. So Ryan, what were your thoughts about the hospital explosion?
Yeah, so I know a lot of people get angry about this loophole in Final Destination where William Bloodworth's character talks about, he says the introduction of new life can prevent death and mess up death's design, basically. So what he's actually saying is you have to die in order to mess up death's design and be resuscitated to essentially be brought back to life. So the main characters are thinking that the pregnant woman's baby being born is going to save them, when the whole point is it isn't. And death is playing on them thinking that. And so Kim has another premonition, and that's when she realizes, oh, she was never going to be involved in the accident the whole time. And so then that's when she puts two and two together and realizes that that didn't make a difference about that baby being born. And because they were focused on that baby being born, when the real thing is she needed to die in order to prevent or put a kink in death's design. And so that's what they learned. And then as far as that kill sequence, I liked it just because they make you think that the baby being born is going to save them. And then that's when Eugene, I think his respirator, it went into like emergency backup mode, as if Death was just doing like a mock charge at them, like doing a fake out, putting his foot on the metal for a little bit to make you think, oh, he's gonna die. And then Death leaves the room and then comes back in. When Claire opens that door, she's letting oxygen into the room, and that's feeding some type of there was something exploded. I don't recall what caused the fire, but I just know that her opening the door brought oxygen into the room, and that helped ignite it. So overall, I like that kill sequence. I thought it was a good fake out. So
to me, this is, after you see a few of these, it starts to get, to my point of view, old. Now the important part here is William Bloodworth's statement about introduction of life, but this is even more important. It's not just introduction of life. This goes back to the Bible, John chapter 3. Jesus tells Nicodemus that In order for you to be saved, you must be born again. Nicodemus asked Jesus, so are you expecting me to enter my mother's womb and be birthed again out of her womb? And what Jesus means by this is that you're having a spiritual transformation. He's not talking about a physical rebirth. He's talking about a spiritual rebirth where your old goes away, your old evilness goes away, and that you get what Jesus imputes onto you, a Christ-like spirit. And this is done by Jesus dying on the cross, where he takes on the sins of the world and takes it on and takes on that pain, the sins from the past, the sins of the present, and the sins of the future for all those who believe in him. And he takes on it as a perfect sacrifice and dies for all who will become believers or are believers. And so he does this. And this is the power of a power over death. So this is the one thing that you see in actual reality that supersedes death, is Jesus dying on the cross for our sins. So even though we may face and we will face a physical death, Jesus' death and resurrection on the third day is what gives us life after death, with him and not apart from him. Because if you're apart from him, you're in hell. So you shouldn't just wish to go to heaven after you die. You should hope and put your faith in Christ so that you're with him after you die, because he's the only one who's defeated death. So moving on to our last part of this particular film. So this is going to be a whole drowning situation there, where Kimberly has a premonition that she's going to drown. And she actually works to fulfill the premonition by attempting to drive into a lake there on purpose to die. And so she does so and starts to sink, and it looks like she's going to drown. And then the police officer that's been in the movie the whole time, which may or may not be romantically interested in her or whatever, jumps into the water and starts swimming down, and he's hitting on the window to try to break it so he can pull her out of the water and pull her into safety. And then it cuts into a hospital scene where you have the doctor that she was worried about that would hurt Isabella is helping her. And then you see the police officer there as well next to her in the hospital room there. And then that's pretty much it. So Ryan, what are your thoughts about this scene?
So this is a scene where this movie makes a mistake, or at least some of the writing is not there all the way. And the reason why is because Kim drives the van into the lake. And how many times have we seen in this franchise where someone thinks they can take matters into their hands and death prevents them from doing it? We saw it earlier in this film with Eugene thinking that he controls his life, this and that, and he tries to kill himself with that revolver from the cop, and it misfires, the gun doesn't fire. So it's like with Kim driving this vehicle into the lake, you would think that death would have prevented her from being saved from that van. The death should have been locking those doors, making sure that the glass was unbreakable from the cop, preventing him from being able to get her up out of there, because that threw a kink into Death's design. And so that's where the writing is not there in this film. That's where it doesn't make any sense, because on all other accounts of us seeing characters that take matters into their hands, they are told by Death essentially that they can't do anything even with action. So that's what doesn't make any sense.
Well, let's go ahead and move on to the last and final scene of this particular movie. So we're at a barbecue. We see that the police officer and Kim are have been invited to the barbecue of this farmer boy and his family. And so they're in the backyard, beautiful landscape, green grass all around, picnic tables over there as well, grilled food. And so the farmer boy that we saw, our other character, I think it was Rory, help him out and save him. He steps away, goes to go get some more meat off of the grill, and then the mother and father and stuff like that are talking about how he was saved and how Rory saved him and stuff. And then that's when it clicked, as you see the camera pan to Kim and the police officer, and they realize, oh, well, the boy's next to die. And as soon as they look at each other a bit, then we see an explosion, and then we see his body parts fall all over the place, and his arm falls into on the table next to his mom, and she starts screaming, and then it cuts to the credits for this film. Ryan, what were your thoughts about that?
So my thoughts are, when are these people in this universe going to learn to stop using propane grills? We'll see something similar to this in one of the later installments. But so pretty much there's no happy endings in Final Destination, and they should have known that. And so essentially the kid goes over to get something off the grill, and then boom, an explosion, and then that's when we get the arm landing on that dinner plate and then the mom screaming. And I remember this scene very vividly because I remember when Dad rented this movie when we were kids, and I remember walking into the bonus room and then seeing the woman screaming, and I was just confused. I'm like, what's going on? Because I was maybe 9 or 10 years old when he rented this movie. So it's just one of those little silly endings that Final Destination has. Each of them have you can't beat death in the end. And so,
Ryan, what is your crown Carnage?
So I would have to give it to the Premonition Sequence kill where the log truck goes through the car and kills that cop.
So your crown Carnage for best kill is that scene. Yeah. And then what about the monkey Misfire for worst kill?
So I would say mine would be the elevator decapitation. I didn't think it was that good. Elevators don't work like that, and so that I don't ever get scared going into an elevator, so that just didn't work for me. So
let's give our final verdict of this film. So I'll go ahead and have Ryan give his. What is yours, Ryan?
So considering the impact of this film on the franchise and the fact that this film is very rememberable by the vast majority of people who know the log truck sequence, I'm gonna have to give this a growl, and it's mainly because this movie overall was one of the better installments in this franchise. And it's a fun film. It's got a lot of rewatch value. So
to me, I would give it a marked minus. This film has a lack of character development. It's apparent throughout all of these scenes. It focuses way too much on the kill scenes. It has gratuitous nudity that doesn't need to be a part of the film at all. And it really is lacking in the storyline. And for that reason, I give it a marked minus. Ryan, what are we working on?
So we are working on the Final Destination 3 and then completing the franchise out in our next few videos. So
and remember, Fright Fams, be watchful.